The sky was still dark when Daniel stepped outside his house and quietly closed the door behind him. A cold breeze drifted through the empty street, carrying the damp smell of early morning air. The world seemed frozen in the strange silence that always exists before sunrise. Daniel had followed this same routine for years, without missing a single morning. Before the sun appeared, he would walk down the quiet street toward the neighborhood park. Those peaceful walks always helped him clear his thoughts and begin the day with calm. That morning felt different the moment he stepped onto the sidewalk. The air felt heavier than usual, almost thick enough to touch. A thin layer of fog rolled slowly across the road. Streetlights flickered weakly through the mist like fading stars. Their pale glow barely illuminated the silent houses along the street. Even the distant hum of traffic had completely disappeared. Daniel walked slowly along the empty pavement, while the fog curled around his shoes. His footsteps echoed softly in the quiet neighborhood. Something about the silence felt strangely unnatural. Usually he would hear birds waking in the trees, or a dog barking somewhere far away. Occasionally a car would pass through the streets, heading toward the highway. That morning the entire neighborhood felt abandoned. He reached the entrance of the park, where a narrow gravel path disappeared into the fog. Tall trees stood on both sides like silent guardians watching over the trail. Their branches twisted together high above his head. Daniel stepped onto the gravel path and continued forward without hesitation. Small stones cracked beneath his shoes with every step he took. The sound seemed unusually loud in the silent park. The fog inside the park felt thicker than the mist covering the streets outside. It clung to the trees and bushes like a pale curtain hiding the deeper forest. Familiar shapes appeared distorted through the drifting haze. Daniel noticed the park lights had already turned off for the morning. The only light now came from the faint glow of the coming sunrise, somewhere behind the clouds. Even that light struggled to reach the ground. A strange uneasiness slowly formed in his chest as he walked deeper into the park. It felt as though something unseen was quietly observing him from within the fog. The back of his neck prickled with cold tension. He glanced behind him for a moment while continuing to walk. The entrance of the park had already disappeared into the thick mist. The empty trail stretched silently behind him. Daniel tried to ignore the growing discomfort in his mind. After all, he had walked through this park hundreds of times before without any trouble. Nothing strange had ever happened here. Yet the deeper he walked, the heavier the silence became. The forest around him seemed to be holding its breath. Even the wind refused to move the leaves. The gravel path twisted deeper between the tall trees ahead. Fog drifted across the trail in slow rolling waves. Daniel felt the quiet park watching him with invisible eyes. A faint chill moved through the air as he continued walking. The trees began to blur together in the thickening fog. Every direction looked the same. For several minutes the only sound was the steady rhythm of his footsteps. Gravel shifted under his shoes with each step forward. The noise echoed gently through the silent park. Then something unusual happened. Another faint crunch followed just after his own step landed on the gravel. The sound was soft but unmistakable. It carried clearly through the quiet air behind him. Daniel slowed his pace slightly while listening carefully. The fog curled across the path ahead like pale smoke. He continued walking while paying attention to every sound. Again his foot pressed against the gravel path. A second step echoed behind him a moment later. The sound matched his movement almost perfectly. A cold uneasiness settled in his chest. Daniel tried convincing himself the noise was simply an echo bouncing between the trees. The explanation felt weak even in his own mind. He walked a little faster along the path. Gravel cracked beneath his shoes in quicker steps. A delayed set of footsteps followed again behind him. The sound was impossible to ignore now. It moved with the same rhythm as his own walking. Each time he changed his pace, the other steps changed as well. Daniel's heartbeat slowly began to rise. The peaceful silence of the park suddenly felt less comforting than before. Something about the sound felt intentional. He stopped walking suddenly. The second set of footsteps stopped at the exact same moment. The silence that followed felt heavy and suffocating. Daniel slowly turned around and stared down the empty trail behind him. The fog swallowed the path completely, hiding everything beyond a short distance. No one stood there. The gravel path remained untouched, except for his own footprints. Mist drifted gently between the trees. Nothing moved anywhere in the park. He stood there, listening carefully for several seconds. The forest remained silent and lifeless. Even the faint rustling of leaves had disappeared. Daniel turned forward again and forced himself to keep walking. His shoes pressed into the gravel path once more. Every sound now felt sharper in the quiet air. For a moment, nothing unusual happened. Fog drifted slowly between the trees. The path stretched deeper into the mist. Then the second set of footsteps returned. The faint crunch echoed behind him again with quiet patience. Daniel felt a cold chill crawl slowly along his spine. The park no longer felt like a safe place for a morning walk. He resisted the urge to look back again. The sound followed him for several steps before suddenly stopping. The silence returned but felt even more disturbing than before. Daniel continued walking deeper into the fog-covered park. His heartbeat echoed loudly in his ears. Somewhere behind him, something unseen seemed to be waiting. As he continued forward, something unusual appeared ahead. A darker patch of fog lingered near the trees beside the trail. At first, it looked like nothing more than a shadow. Daniel slowed his pace while studying the shape carefully. The dark silhouette stood near the trees, as though it belonged there, yet it looked too tall to be part of the forest. The fog shifted gently, revealing more of the strange figure. It stood upright, like a person standing still among the trees. However, its proportions looked strangely wrong. The shape appeared unusually thin and elongated. Its edges twisted unnaturally into the surrounding fog. It looked less like a human and more like a living shadow. Daniel felt a cold shiver crawl along his spine. The figure remained completely motionless. It seemed to be silently watching him. He stood frozen on the path while trying to understand what he was seeing. His mind searched desperately for a logical explanation. Perhaps the fog was distorting a tree trunk. Daniel cautiously stepped forward. Gravel cracked softly beneath his shoe. The shadow did not react. He stepped closer again, narrowing the distance. The dark silhouette became clearer through the drifting mist. Its outline appeared darker than anything else around it. Something about its stillness felt deeply unsettling. Most shadows shifted when fog moved around them. This one remained perfectly steady. Daniel noticed the figure seemed taller now. The darkness stretched upward like a distorted silhouette against the fog. It almost looked as though it was growing. The air around him suddenly felt colder. A strange tension filled the space between him and the shadow. The forest seemed to be watching the moment unfold. He hesitated before taking another step forward. His heart pounded loudly inside his chest. The figure remained completely still. Then it moved. The movement was slow and unnatural. The darkness seemed to slide backward into the fog instead of walking away. Within seconds, the shape began to dissolve. Daniel stared in disbelief as the silhouette faded deeper into the mist. The fog swallowed it piece by piece. Soon nothing remained. He remained standing on the path, trying to process what he had just seen. The forest returned to complete silence. Mist drifted calmly between the trees. Daniel felt the uneasy sensation growing stronger inside his chest. The shadow had disappeared, but the fear remained. Somewhere beyond the fog, something was still watching him. A faint sound brushed against his hearing as he walked again. At first it blended with the quiet wind moving through the trees. Then it slowly changed into something more disturbing. It sounded like a whisper. The voice was distant and soft. It drifted through the fog with quiet persistence. Daniel felt an immediate sense of unease. He stopped walking and listened carefully. The whisper came again, slightly clearer this time. It carried a strange familiarity. The voice seemed to call from somewhere deeper inside the forest. The fog scattered the sound, making its direction impossible to identify. It floated through the air like a ghostly echo. Daniel stared into the trees beside the path. The forest looked darker and deeper than he had ever noticed before. Something about the whisper pulled at his curiosity. Without realizing it, he stepped away from the gravel trail. Damp grass brushed against his shoes. The fog thickened as he moved toward the trees. The whisper returned again, slightly stronger now. It echoed softly through the branches overhead. The sound felt like something guiding him forward. Daniel walked cautiously between the trees. Fallen leaves crunched under his steps. The park path slowly disappeared behind him. Soon the forest closed around him completely. The fog curled between the trunks like pale smoke. Every direction looked unfamiliar. After several minutes, he noticed a narrow trail cutting through the woods. It looked older than the park path. Tall weeds partially covered it. Daniel followed the trail carefully. The air smelled damp and ancient. The silence here felt heavier. The trail eventually opened into a small clearing. Pale mist hung low across the ground. In the center stood an old wooden sign. Daniel approached it slowly. The wood looked cracked and worn by time. Moss covered most of its surface. He brushed the moss away, revealing faded carved letters. The message described a strange disappearance. A man had vanished during a morning walk in the forest. A cold wave passed through Daniel's body. The description sounded disturbingly similar to his own routine. Beneath the message was a date carved into the wood. It was not very old. Suddenly the fog shifted at the edge of the clearing. Daniel turned his head slowly. A dark figure stood among the trees. The same shadow had returned. It looked taller than before. Its dark silhouette stretched upward through the fog. The shape seemed almost alive. Daniel felt fear tighten in his chest. The figure remained silent and still, yet it felt intensely aware of him. Then the shadow began moving closer. It glided through the fog with slow, unnatural motion. Daniel's instinct screamed for him to leave. He quickly turned and ran from the clearing. Branches scratched against his jacket as he pushed through the forest. The fog swallowed the trail around him. Panic filled his chest. After several minutes he slowed down, hoping he had escaped. The fog shifted, revealing an open space ahead. His stomach twisted when he saw the same clearing again. The wooden sign stood exactly where it had before. No matter which direction he ran, the forest kept bringing him back. The whisper returned, drifting through the fog round him. It sounded closer now. Then the shadow stepped out of the mist again. It stood only a short distance away. Its tall shape towered silently over him. The whispering voices filled the forest. Daniel tried to run, but exhaustion slowed his legs. The fog thickened until the trees nearly disappeared. The shadow followed patiently. Far away beyond the forest, the sun slowly began to rise. Morning light touched the edges of the park. Birds started singing again. The gravel path in the park looked peaceful and empty. The fog faded away with the growing daylight. Nothing unusual remained, but Daniel never returned from his morning walk.